Hello, everyone. My name's Chris Oakley, and let me extend a warm welcome to those of you joining us today for this special recording. Although not a podcast as such, it is commemorating the 10th anniversary of podcast I recorded back in 2013 with three other men that I shall now introduce to you. First of all, we have the man who back then co-produced a blog site with me called The Football Attic and presented that original podcast, Rich Johnson. Hello, Rich.
Hello, how are you, sir?
Very well, thank you very much. And the same to you, I trust.
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I mean, that's a lie. My health is in terrible decline, but other than that, I'm great. I'm mentally happy.
Excellent. And secondly, we have the two people that were guests on that same podcast, who I'm pleased to say went on to become firm friends with myself and Rich. It's John Devlin from True Colours Football Kit and Jay from designfootball.com. Hello to you both.
Oops. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
Hello. Who said oops? Was that you, Rich?
It was me. I dropped my pen on.
Oh, it was you.
Sorry about that.
I was going to say I would describe the relationship more as adversarial. Adversarial, whatever. You know what I mean.
It's easy for you.
I did. Wasn't sure if John was saying
do it in
oops
the
as in
accent, John.
Sorry, Rich.
Wasn't sure if John was saying oops as in oops, I shouldn't have recorded that podcast 10 years ago. Look where it's got me.
Not at all. Not at all.
Now, this recording isn't so much an acknowledgement of the 10th anniversary of our being on the same podcast for the first time as a celebration of 10 years of friendship, which wouldn't have happened had we not recorded it. So, Rich, we have a lot to be thankful for about that podcast, which was published back in October 2013. Perhaps you could set the scene by, first of all, telling us about how we came to invite John and Jay onto the podcast.
I mean, well, we'd been doing the Attic podcast, I think, by this point for over a year, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it was less than that. I can't remember. It's so long ago.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think we'd done a couple of episodes on kits already. And I'd known John for a while because I'd sort of originally got to know him via his True Colours Kits website. And obviously we knew Jay from Design Football, and it just seemed a logical thing. I think we'd all been chatting a lot. And I think, were they the first guests we ever had on?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, there we go. So, that was the thing. It was like, if we're going to have guests on, then why not go the whole hog and have some absolute legends of the kit world? You know, if we're going to talk kits. So yeah, it was good fun as well. And I think it was an experiment because it was the first time we'd ever recorded, obviously with more than two people, and to go from two to four, especially with the technology issues we used to have back then, it was a bit of a risk, but I think it turned out all right.
Absolutely, it did. Certainly did. And John, Jay, what were your thoughts at the time about appearing on the Football Attic podcast? Had either of you done much sort of podcasting before that?
I don't think I had, actually. No, I think that was the first time, but it was just such fun, and I love the way that we would talk about something, and it would literally spiral, and someone else would pick something else up, and the conversation would just go on and on and on, and we'd come to all sorts of ideas and conclusions, and that's the thing that really gave me a buzz at the time. But I loved it.
Yeah,
excellent.
Similar for me. I hadn't done a podcast before, I don't think, and I was particularly nervous actually before coming on. But like John says, it felt very natural as soon as we started recording. One thing just led to another in terms of conversation. So yeah, it was really, really good fun. It definitely got the bug for doing podcasts from that episode that I didn't expect. I just expected I would just go on as a guest and that would be great. And if I don't make too much of an idiot of myself, that would be fantastic. And if I can contribute, great. But yeah, I loved it.
Well, I think I'd met Jay. Jay, we met in 2010, didn't we? Or 2009 at that Umbro England away shirt launch.
Yeah, I think it would be 2010, wouldn't it?
Must
would
have
been a couple of months before they released the shirt, maybe.
And then we sat next to each other at the game. We got invited to
the
match, didn't we?
Yeah, we got invited to the match as well, yeah. I think that's where we knew each other from. I think we talked a lot, because I've been at Classic Football Shirts, maybe we talked there. But yeah, as Rich says, contributing to your website, so there would have been a lot of dialogue there, I think, as well. Not contributing to your website, I mean, just commenting on things that have been put on your website. So we sort of knew each other from there. But I still think I pestered Rich to get onto this episode. I think like John, you were a sort of a shoe-in, but I think I had to like. I think maybe I don't know if you were gonna do a kit special or something, but I got talking to Rich, I think, and said, yeah, there should be a special on kits and I should be on it. And I think I don't know if I would have said John should be on it first, but I think probably that was a given that John would be on it if you could get John on. But then I was like, yeah, have me on as well because I know lots about football kits.
Yeah, I think we probably spoke a lot on Twitter, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I think for me, definitely, I'd been fangirling over John for many a year at this point. So, and yeah, leaving comments on his website, hoping he'd just at least acknowledge it and reply, and then I'd get all, he replied.
You were outside my house for about 2 months, wasn't it, with a flask and a blanket?
Yeah, until you got the police involved, John. But we're still not going to talk about that. You just denied that you wanted me there, but you wanted it, John. Anyway, sinister. But yeah, so it was. And I think like Jay said, I think we'd spoken a lot on Twitter, and I honestly cannot remember, but that does sound like something you would have said, Jay. Like, you need me on this podcast, and it's like, but I think we'd already sort of thought about it anyway, because obviously I think if we were going to have John on, it would be nice to have someone else. And I think I'd sort of probably said to Chris, like, well, I know Jay knows a hell of a lot about kits, and it would make sense. So, and he is kind of begging me and standing outside my house for 3 months, with a placard. But the nice thing was it just seemed to work very well as well. We all gelled very well, because that's another thing when you're doing a podcast. Even if you have one guest on, there's always the risk that it might not work because it just depends. I mean, we've had many guests down the years, and a few of us have been guests on other podcasts as well. And it's there's always that thing of will you gel with the sort of the long-term host. But the nice thing for us was that it just seemed very natural from the moment we started. And obviously that continued when we sort of did other stuff down the years, like when we did the 50 greatest football shirts. And then obviously when we did a lot of the kit list stuff together. So yeah, it's I mean, as John said, it's always been great fun. But from day one, it just seemed to sort of click. So it was a natural thing, really.
Yeah. I remember you sort of saying, there's these two fellas, Jay and John Devlin. I know John, know of John at least, and I sort of left all the organisation of that up to you, and trusted you completely, and I'm glad I did because, as I say, listening back to that original podcast, it's actually quite incredible that we're talking to each other in a very comfortable and relaxed way, as if we'd known each other for years, which is remarkable. Because I think we've all done podcasts before where you're speaking to someone you don't know, and there's these awkward silences and this sort of thing of like, I don't think he understood what I just said and all that stuff. And there was none of that on the original podcast. It was quite remarkable, actually. So, which is
I don't know. I think there's been many
wonderful human beings we are.
Sorry, I was going to say I think there's been many a time where I've not understood what Jay said.
So the thing that I loved as well is that it really felt like we all were on the same level as well. And I think we've been on podcasts where someone says, "Oh yeah, I've been into kits for about 3-4 weeks now," and I go, "Oh, okay." But that sounds really sort of elitist. But I always felt the four of us we were always equals, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think there was a time span there, wasn't there? I think so. We had got into football kits, all of us, before getting into football kits was really a thing. It's like people are quite open. I listen to all the podcasts now, and they seem to be quite open about the fact that the pandemic came along and they needed a hobby and had plenty of time, so they got into maybe buying and selling football kits or being interested in them or collecting them or something. They just needed a hobby. I think in different ways our interests had happened a little bit more organically than that, maybe. Or well, I suppose it's organic anyway, but we weren't lucky enough to have a pandemic prior to doing our podcast, I suppose.
Careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, I think there was definite overlap in the way we had got interested in football kits, and I think that helped, and it's maybe at odds with the way that other people have. Like a lot of what's going on now is post the boom that classic football shirts brought. And certainly when we all got into football kits, there was no classic football shirts really, or the beginnings of it. There was no classic football shirts. So I think that's maybe a factor as well.
Yeah, massively.
Again, the original sort of podcast. I mean, it was interesting that we really started off from the point of view of sort of saying stuff like talking about stuff like how did we get into football kit design, and it was almost like we had to introduce ourselves to each other for the benefit of an audience listening in. But having done that, we actually covered quite a bit of ground in that, whatever it was, hour and a half, or whatever, in that podcast from 10 years ago. I've scribbled down sort of notes of things that we discussed here, like which manufacturer should have been more successful than it was, and it led on to a discussion about Bacta. We talked about the pinstripe kits of the early 80s. We talked about, Jay, on designfootball.com, whether people were, like amateur designers, were borrowing elements from real life kits, and talked about our favorite manufacturers and that sort of thing. And it's striking really how much of what we discussed is actually still relevant. Like there was sort of talk of the fact that there seemed to be a bit of originality and creativity missing from football kit design, such as it was in 2013. I mean, who'd have thought after all this time that it would still be a pertinent issue?
Well, it's funny when you talked about pinstripes, and you said pinstripes of the early 80s, and I felt like saying, yeah, and the mid 90s, and then today, it's still there's still not been much. It's moved on. We've got the pretty patterns now, but that's sort of about it.
That's right. We were talking about the worst ever kit articles that were going around at the time. Well, that kind of led on to any number of different sort of sub projects that we've done down the years. Criticizing that sort of stuff, and we were talking about sort of over fussy designs that have maybe too many sponsors and clutter. And I think, John, you said sleeve patches were a waste of time. I'm wondering if for any of you, your views have changed on any of that sort of thing. Are we now 10 years on? Are we sort of looking back and going, actually, things have got better or worse in certain regards? We might as well sort of breach the subject now, because this is kind of like part of the point of doing this recording. Where are we at football kit design now? And did we have it great back then but didn't know it?
I don't think it was particularly great back then. I don't think it's particularly any better or worse at the moment. I suppose that's the kind of thing. I don't feel there's been much in the way of progression over the last decade. There's been changes, sure, but I always feel like if you look back at a decade, there's a sort of style of a kit. Like the 70s would have been kind of, collars and, scratchy material. The 80s would have been shiny material. The 90s was when it all went a bit crazy. And then the sort of early 2000s for me was when there was just a lot of, I don't know. I've always said that the 2000s was when kit design lost its way, and then there was just a lot of experimental ideas, but none of which seemed to really come off, in my opinion. And then I think the 2010s was the return to retro style. And I just think maybe the last decade, there hasn't been much. I'd say the only thing, weirdly, that has sort of made an increase is the novelty shirt. That's sort of, you think back in 2013, I think La Jolla Lorca had just released their first broccoli kit. So that was, realistically the sort of birth of the modern novelty shirt. I'm not talking like 90s where people went just crazy designs. I'm talking specific novelty shirts that are designed for a novelty purpose and to get noticed, rather than just the general trend of design. And I think that's one thing that has increased. And I said a couple of years ago, I'd hate to say it, but just it's a point in time, but just after my book had come out, and obviously that was the sort of defining point of the era of novelty kits. I don't mean my book was, sorry, I meant just the timing and that it came out.
Even I was astonished at that at
first. Yeah, I was thinking more of the timing of it rather than the book event itself. Sorry. Because at that point I made the comment, I think I was talking to on the radio at some point and saying that the problem was it was round about the 6 months later when the Arsenal marble effect shirt was coming out, which was also looked like a butcher's block. And I said that the problem for me is that if the mainstream if the big teams start doing novelty shirts, that's the point where you've lost it, because it's novelty shirts serve a nice function for smaller clubs to generate income. If the bigger teams start doing it, then you kill the market for the lower downs, because like everybody's suddenly doing it and the market becomes flooded with it, a bit like the early 90s when design lost its head and the market became flooded with crazy shirts. And so for me, the novelty shirts in the last decade have basically become a thing and then almost like jumped the shark. And it's like now, if you look around, especially this season, there's an awful lot of what I would class as, I suppose, not novelty shirts, but certainly the almost like the 90s coming back, but not in the same way. It's almost like it's a more cynical sort of thing this time, because obviously the 90s was the first time it had been done, and it was all experimentation. It was like, Christ, look what we could do with the technology and the kit materials that we've got. Whereas this all just seems a bit cynical and a bit kind of, oh, look, we're doing this deliberately to get people talking about stuff. Whereas I genuinely don't think the 90s happened like that. People weren't doing stuff to get noticed because everybody was doing it. But suddenly it's like kind of, we're releasing like 4 or 5 kits a season. Let's go nuts with one of them. And it's just like have this completely off the face design. And some of them are good and some of them are bad, but I just think the general movement towards that is not necessarily a good thing, especially when, like I say, it's the higher up clubs that are doing it and therefore potentially stealing a market from the smaller clubs.
Well, I remember a podcast, one of the last ones that we did, and we talked about novelty kits. And I think Spurs had just released something or other. And I remember we were talking about this, and we sort of said there's a really fine line now between novelty kits and actually contemporary kit design. And it was almost like, how do we draw that distinction? And I think you're right. I think it's virtually all not all novelty, but it's a huge percentage of novelty kits. And it's like they're relying on that to shout the loudest, rather than actually good progressive design that kind of transcends everything else.
Yeah, we did touch on it on that podcast. It was the Liverpool kits of that season when we did that podcast were I think it's what Rich calls Horace Goes Skiing, is it?
Yeah, and the Space Invader one.
Yeah, so
Warrior
the Liverpool, Warrior ones away in third of that season, and my feeling at the time, and it applies even more today, is the idea that it's the equivalent of the column inches, where you get how viral a shirt goes. The conversion rate doesn't need to be particularly high for you to get your money, and like there's all kinds of different marketing tactics they can use. So it can be a sort of a loss leader in order to, as part of the marketing for a range or whatever it is. So I think that's part of it. And then in the last few years, the rule book has sort of been torn up, and I think a big part of that is the Forward Madison. I think that would be the main example where someone came along and went, I don't care what a football shirt looks like, I'm going to create this thing. And people could have gone, well, okay, well, that's clearly not a football shirt, so we're going to ignore that. Instead, it was celebrated. And I think that's what's brought about all the very, very loud shirts we've had recently. So, like, what comes to mind is that Spurs shirt. It's probably the Galaxy one with the like Cosmos type pattern or something.
Yeah.
So that would be the Spurs one, but there's obviously the Dazzle shit Man United kit, which you never would have thought possible that they would release a kit like that. And I think it's become more acceptable to do that sort of thing. But you do get good ones. So I really like this season's Arsenal. I think, is it the away shirt maybe? Which is black and bright yellow with a swirl pattern on it. I think that really works well, and I think it's quite popular with the fans as well. You see so many of them at the games. So it hasn't nothing's really moved on, but it's just proportionally how many brands are willing to do that craziness. And it's interesting as well that a brand that we certainly didn't talk about back then was Macron. And Macron haven't really gone down that road to the same extent with the loud designs. They're doing football kits as football kits should look, I think. So they have one main feature maybe to them that's a little bit new and modern, but then aside from that, it's just classily done. So yeah, has it moved on to a certain extent? But remember, this was 2013 was just only a few years after tailored by. So the England kit came out in 2009. So did, I think, Manchester City in 2009. And then tailored by in earnest started in 2010, I think. So that's when more teams were getting the kits. So that was starting to shift in 2013, but now it's obviously massively shifted again. But maybe we'll go back to, maybe the cycle will occur again, and we'll have stripped back kits again.
I mean, I have been fairly critical of the kind of design cul-de-sac that kits are in, I feel, and partly because of sort of UEFA and FIFA rulings on kits. I think it's well documented that designers can't do what they would like to do because of these regulations. But I found an article the other day and it said, why hasn't popular culture moved on in 20 years? And they said, if you look at the 80s compared to the 70s, compared to the 60s, etc., there's massive shifts. But they said, if you watched a program from 2005, it would be very difficult to pinpoint what year it was because things are pretty much the same. And that really hit me. I thought, even when you look at the 90s, there's loads of bobs and massive colourful blazers on programs and stuff. But since then, the last 20 years, I don't think popular culture and design has moved on as much as perhaps it had done in previous decades, whether that's due to the internet, more awareness. But it did make me think, I reckon that's what's kind of going on with football kits.
I heard someone say a while back, it was really apposite comment. They sort of said, kind of following on from what you said there, John, if you were to make a film or a documentary now and you wanted it set in the 60s, you'd dressed up in all the 60s clothes and they'd be carrying little transistor radios around, blah, blah, blah. 70s, I don't know, more flares, different hairstyles. If you did a film now, they said, whoever it was that said it, if you were doing a film set in 2010, you just give them a different mobile phone.
Yeah,
that's literally the only difference between then and now. And it's sort of true. And I know you have said a few times in recent years, John, about the fact that these days football kits often they've either got a really leery pattern just sort of slapped all over it, or you go down the retro route. And I think we were just starting to see the first signs of that in 2013. There were one or two sort of retro things going on, whereas now, and I don't want to sound like the kind of grumpy old man, but I mean maybe that's where I am in life now. But it's almost like that's what you should expect your team to have every season. They will have some sort of retro-inspired kit, and also touching on something you said earlier on, I think, which is that they used to sort of plunder some design from say the 80s, but then they didn't sort of stop there and go back to new designs every year. They then sort of thought, well, now next year we'll have a kit from the 90s, and then the year after that we'll go back to the 70s, and then we'll go back to, and it's like it happens every season now. And I know not every retro design, but it seems like that's how we're doing it now. This is the era of new retro, and it does get a bit boring. That's yeah.
I mean, a perfect example of that. So I would say that the kind of the retro themed kits reached a peak in the 2018 World Cup, where pretty much all of Adidas's kits were a retro theme. And some of them were nice, but some of them were a bit, uninspired. But the funny thing is, around about that time, that was when Cov got Hummel back as a kit manufacturer. And their first kit when they came back was a reinterpretation of their classic Denmark 86 kit, which I think worked really well because it was taking an old design but modernizing it. And then the following year, they did a kind of, and every year since then, other than this year, they've done a shirt that's been inspired by a previous shirt, but they've reworked it. And I think they've done it really well. They've kind of got the balance between an homage to the old kit and something refreshingly new until this season. And this season, I just think Hummel have lost their way. And I don't mean just for Com, I mean in general, because I think they focus so much on redoing the 86 template again. And I don't think they've done it that well. And I just think they've put so much focus on that they've kind of, where they've done bespoke kits for everyone else, they've kind of just lost focus on it. Because our Cov kit this season is, I just think it's just weak. It's like, yes, there's little elements that they've done before, like there's little nods to Coventry, which is one thing I have, like the Hummel have always done. They've always got little elements in there that are, for the unique to the city, be it little things about the cathedral or other things like that. But it's just the general kit looks like it was phoned in at the last minute. Now, I don't know if that's because of this. There was an issue with the UK supplier went bust, and then we almost didn't have Hummel, because so it could have been that they had were working on a design, but then had to abandon it and come up with something at the last minute. But it's not just that. Like I say, it's everywhere else that's suddenly getting this, retro inspired kit. And the thing is, some of them look really nice. I'm not going to deny that. They do look really great. I mean, it is a great template after all. But like the Brondby one in all yellow looks great. I think the Everton one in like a kind of silver color looks fantastic. And even Cov's green and black, I think looks amazing. But it's the fact that they've done that. It's not how good it looks, because it still looks great. It's the fact that they've done that. And that's their kind of, it's like they've just put all of their cash into sort of doing this retro thing, and I'm sure it's working brilliantly, because like I say, it's still a great shirt. It's just, for those who remember the first time round, it's just like, okay. And also because they did it in 2019 or 2018, whenever it was, but reinterpreted, it's kind of like, oh, hang on, so you kind of rehashed it a couple of years ago, and now you're doing it again, but you're doing it properly, if you see what I mean. So it's, I don't know. It just feels like there's kind of, I think this year's been a bit of a, I feel like some of the kits that we've had in the last couple of years, there's been some really nice examples, and I feel like it's almost reached a point where designers have just kind of got fatigue, because they're having to do so many kits every year now. And I just feel like this year, it's like almost like collectively the designers just went, oh, we're just really tired. Just do this, just do the, not the bare minimum, but just do enough to make it look all right, and that'll be fine for this year. And I don't know if he'll get anything better next year. That's the training shirt, isn't it, Jay, that you're holding up there?
Jay is holding up an image for us.
It's what, sorry?
They've called it the adult 2023-24 match day home shirt. So I guess it's a pre-match shirt.
It is, yeah. It's what they were. But actually, one thing I was going to say, actually, and it kind of chimes back into the novelty things, is in the last few weeks, Hummel released an equality shirt, which was the 86 template, albeit with a crew neck, but in a million different colors. Obviously, like kind of probably getting the rainbow flag in there, and just a whole load of colors. But it was released as a pre-match shirt, not an actual match shirt, which I think is a shame. I think it would have been great if they could have all the teams doing that could have actually worn it as a match shirt. But it was a pre-match shirt. But even so, I still wanted one. And that's the first pre-match shirt ever that I've wanted to buy. Not just because of the design, because of what it represented, but also just I think it looked fantastic. If you're going to do a novelty shirt now, that is a great way to do it. The only thing I would say is that on closer inspection, all the details on it are sublimated. So all the badges on it are just like, sublimation, as is the Hummel logo. So it's been done on the cheap, and yet they were still charging 48 quid for it. Or 45, I think, in the club shop. But then if you bought it on the Hummel website, it was 48 quid. But then they just said, oh, sorry, we can't send it to the UK. So we've just we've cancelled your order. Thanks.
Did they have individual club crests on them then?
They did, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
But they were sublimated.
Yeah.
So they obviously had a set number of, shirts per club.
Yeah.
But you bring up another point. I mean, as we were talking, I was looking up the definition of the word regurgitate, because ideas are being regurgitated. And, there's a natural lack of quality or nourishment, if you like, in the more we regurgitate something. But also, it's just taking things at face value. It's like, and it's used the example, regurgitating a fact that you've heard at a lecture or something. But I think you're right, Rich, is that Hummel have dealt with that fairly well until about this season, where they have made something new out of it. But this season they have. I would say exactly the same, that they're plundering that back catalogue a little bit too heavily. But the idea of a pre-match shirt as well makes me think about diluting football kits. The fact that there's training wear, pre-match shirts, and you look at them and think, well, why couldn't that be the home shirt? What defines all these different things? And I think it's just a dilution of the power of a football shirt as well. It's not that treasure jersey. It's something that lasts, let's be honest, it doesn't really last 12 months because it's sold off cheap. It's, it's got such a short lifespan, and it's diluted by all the other training and leisure wear that goes with it.
Yeah,
I think this is. Sorry, go on, Jay.
No, sorry. I was just going to agree. Really, I think that decision of, I think it's great to have the variety. I don't have a problem with that. So if you don't like any of the match shirts, you've got the pre-match shirts as well. And like, I've always just wanted more. But I think the decision making in what gets selected as the match shirt and what gets selected as pre-match, I think that's sometimes a bit off, because or training wear. So I prefer training shirts a lot of the time to the match shirts. And okay, they know their business, and I'm sure they're seeing that the sales are reflecting their decisions. But yeah, like that's why I showed that Coventry City shirt, because I think that's great. Have you got that one, Rich? Did you get that? No, you don't buy the pre-match shirts, do you?
But actually, that brings to an interesting point, because I did try to get this one, and it's, for me, this is the first time where I feel that pre-match and actual match kit the lines have been properly blurred. Now, I know we've had like things before, like the Man United Chinese New Year kit and things like that, but they were very definitely pre-match shirts. The way Hummel launched this one was like a kit launch.
Yeah.
And in my head, I feel I want to own it so that I can. So if I'm being a Cov City kit completist, I feel I should own that shirt. But it's not a match shirt. But I still feel that I should own it to have the complete lineup of Cov shirts. And that, for me, it's almost scary, because I've always been very much against the pre-match shirts being treated as kits. But now Hummel have successfully blurred that line so much that people are buying it because they feel that they've got to have it in their collection to have all the Cov kits. But it's not a kit. But it is, and it isn't. I hate them for it.
When you say they unveiled it with a kit launch, do you mean loads of Photoshop smoke and a player putting his finger to his head?
And someone else pointing to a tattoo? Yeah. Well, it was. I mean, they did do the typical thing where they're all, literally a bunch of players, just literally standing in a line or looking moody in some dark and abandoned industrial estate, and sort of all standing on a box doing the thinker pose, so it was very much launched like that. Yeah, John. They didn't talk about dry weave technology though, and how the socks give you an extra 6% performance though.
or it's kids on the street wearing sort of other tracksuits and whatever, that kind of vibe.
Urban wear.
Urban wear.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jay.
The sort of stuff that us four wear.
Well, I actually do.
Well, you do actually, Jay.
This is certainly not a conversation we would have been having 10 years ago, like the discussion about the pre-match shirt. So that's interesting how things have evolved. And I think a lot of the launches are kind of postmodern. A lot of the time there may be like a little bit tongue-in-cheek, sort of referencing stuff in a sort of a satire way. But it makes me think of, so like your book, Rich, I don't know if you could write it in 10 years' time, especially because it's weird and wonderful. I don't know if you could write that book in 10 years' time and exclude the pre-match shirts, because they are some of the weirdest and arguably some of the most wonderful shirts as well. So I think it would sit differently releasing it in 10 years' time because of the boom in the pre-match things, because you'd go, oh, well, what about that? Like, as I think you might mention, Chris, the Man United Chinese New Year shirt. Why isn't that in here? Like, that's definitely a weird and wonderful shirt. But the the other thing that it reminded me of is that incredible tweet by, I can't remember what the account's called. Is it like Old Firm Facts or something, that said, not many people know this, but retro football fashion brand Arsenal actually have a football team that beat professional side Sheffield United a little while ago. That's paraphrasing, but it's one of my favourite tweets of all time. And it had that cartoon picture of, I think it's like David Seaman driving a car wearing an old Arsenal goalkeeper shirt or something. So yeah, the boom in, well, that's I suppose that's what it is. Like, you have the podcast now about football, and there has been such a boom, and classic football shirts are obviously huge, and it's that tying in with fashion that's allowed them to go in these weird directions, which we probably wouldn't have talked about. Football shirts were their own thing 10 years ago when we were talking about that. But now it's massively it's a big fashion thing now as well.
I think that raises a really good point, Jay. I think you're entirely right. You couldn't write that book in 10 years' time without including those shirts, because they've become so woven in as part of the fabric of what represents a club's kit. And the funny thing is, I think that's at some point there'll be a generational split over that, because old people like us lot, not including you, Jay, you're that kind of transition between old and young still. Like, for us, pre-match kits will never be kit, but for the generations coming up after us, they'll have been brought up with it. So pre-match stuff we always used to have, when we were kids, there was always like leisure wear, and I remember I think we've talked about this before, we had there was gridiron shirts for for the big team. So you'd have American football shirts, which, I love when you see those adverts back again. It's like, because they were such a great idea, kind of like a Celtic American football shirt. But the fact is that, they're such a normal part of a kit repertoire now, that us sitting here saying, well, they're not kit, would be anathema to probably the younger generation, who would be like, well, they are. And in their heads, they won't see it. They won't see a distinction. And they'll think, well, why are these old guys saying it's not kit? Of course it's kit. It's part of the kit collection, it's like, but it's, and I find that interesting. There will be that generational split. And it's something that probably our generation won't get our heads around, in the same way that kids won't get the kids, won't get their heads around the fact that we don't see it that way. And there'll be a kit war at some point, and it will all be horrible and, many casualties.
I think you're right. It is generational. And as much as I hate to say it, I don't think we're right and they're wrong, or they're right and we're wrong. I think it just is. It's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
It's sometimes difficult, because I think we all come from it from a fairly unique, fairly consistent approach of, it's sportswear. We want to see what's being worn on the pitch. That's the excitement. It's not necessarily the crossover to the high street.
But that may be the flaw in the old status quo, is that as fans we were trying to replicate the players too much, in that, okay, so the kit is the kit, so if we go to the match, we wear the same shirt as the players are wearing. So there's a couple of things with that. First thing is, no, you're not a player. Very clearly you're not one of the footballers, but you are part of the fabric of the club, and a very important constituent part of that. So maybe the idea of a supporter shirt, which, okay, so like a pre-match shirt, again, has been worn by the players, but tying it into fashion and wearing something that has an identity as the fan, maybe not such a terrible thing, because everyone has their own role to play. Sorry, just one thing, Rich, that the thing about us being older, just I don't know if you're like saying that I want to be younger than I am. I certainly do, but I am 43, so I am like, I think it's fair to say I'm knocking on. But
I suppose, Jay, I don't regard you as old as me and John and Chris. That's all. I mean, I mean, to be fair, both me and you are in our 40s, and these two, I can't remember if they're 50s or 60s or something. I don't know what they are now. But it's like, but I always see you as, I always think you're in your 30s, Jay. I'll be honest. I didn't realize you were in your 40s.
Yeah.
So
you represent the youth. Apparently.
Yeah, exactly. You are the voice of the youth. But actually,
lustrous hair, Jay. That's what we're all.
What's hair?
Google it, Rich.
It's a comb.
But I was going to say actually one more point is, and the sort of generational split over pre-match and leisure wear shirts is that one thing I often find is that when a new pre-match shirt is launched, you get a lot of people saying the same old thing of, oh God, they're ripping us off again. And, kind of, and I'm sitting there thinking, but you really don't have to buy these. These are pre-match shirts. It's like, I can understand when they release a fourth shirt and a European shirt, but it's like when people start complaining about pre-match shirts and I'm thinking, but it's not even a kit. But then that's when you realize that they don't see it that way, because they've been kind of like brought up with these are the part of the kit, and the kit no longer means the match shirts. It means the whole range that comes out every year. And I find that interesting as well, because for me, it's like when a pre-match shirt comes out, I don't care how much it costs, because I'm not going to buy it unless it's that Hummel one, which I really want. And
they're always cheap as well, aren't they? Sorry, Rich.
Usually, yeah. Well, like I say, the Hummel one was 45, whereas I think our match shirts are 50 quid. So it wasn't much cheaper. And I think that's the thing as well. I think over the years, pre-match and leisure shirts, the prices of those have got closer to the match shirts, which is, I don't know if that's deliberately part of trying to make them more like the match shirts and therefore make them as part of what you would term a generic kit locker in effect, but yeah, it's just, again, that's that generational thing of, I look at it and think, well, I'm not going to buy it. Why does it matter how much it costs or the fact that they've released it? Whereas younger fans might think, well, I've got to get that because it's part of the kit. And it only really kind of just struck me that might be the way of thinking. You're the voice of the youth, Jay. Tell us.
No, nice. Yeah, just on that. Yeah, I'm really not. But the pricing thing is interesting. So, like, everyone is complaining about it. Even like I listen to the podcasts and they talk about, what I've bought these shirts this week, and I'm just thinking, I mean, how do you afford that many shirts a week? But even they are now starting complaining about the price of shirts. And the you say match shirts, but like some of the Adidas and Nike shirts are upwards of $1,000. Not long. A bit that'll come around pretty soon. No, upwards of £100. And like the price in the pre-match shirts, I still agree that they're getting too expensive. And my thinking for that is that they don't include all the technology of, say, the match shirts. So what's the justification for the sort of 40, 50? I think some of the Nike ones are over £50 for a pre-match shirt. I think, but you will like openly admit that these don't have the same technology to actually play in. So why is it priced that way?
But Jay,
Go on,
John. The technology that isn't in the replica shirts.
Exactly. Yeah.
It will be the same. Yeah. It will be the same stuff pretty much as the pre-match shirts.
As the pre-match shirts that you buy. Yeah. Yes. So them being similar prices, that's the range thing. So you can have those two things. But I think for, say, commentary, I don't know if there's a difference between the match shirt and the one that gets sold.
I don't think there is. I
haven't heard for Hummel that that's the case.
No, I think they are literally the same garment because they also don't do a pro version of it.
No.
So I'm pretty sure they are the same.
Yeah.
So one thing that really disillusioned me when it comes to kits pricing was the Scotland 150th anniversary shirt, when the home shirt 65 quid and the anniversary shirt was, I think, 100. And there is no justification for that.
It did come in a cardboard box.
That's an extra version.
Was it?
Yeah, that's 125 or something.
Oh, sorry.
Really, I felt so disillusioned about that. And of course, it sold out in seconds, minutes. And why wouldn't Adidas and the SFA price it that way if it's going to sell. But it left a really bad taste in my mouth that there was no justification for that 35 quid, sort of 50% price hike.
Okay, so this has actually just made me think of something else that wouldn't have been around so much 10 years ago that is absolutely everywhere now. So my immediate thought about the Scotland shirt was I was about to say, and of course literally within seconds they're on eBay, going for 300, 400. And that then made me realize that, of course, the other thing that's on eBay a hell of a lot more now than there was 10 years ago is fakes. Because for instance, that Scotland shirt 10 years ago, you'd have seen it on eBay. And yes, there'd have been scalpers, charging the earth, but there'd have been also some that were reasonably priced, kind of, yes, they were over the limit, but maybe said they sell them for 140 instead of, 300. Nowadays, so I might, at that point, if I really wanted it, I'd have considered buying one off eBay. Now, wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, because there is so many fakes out there and they just flood eBay. Whenever these limited edition shirts come out, I mean, for most shirts, in fact, but especially the limited edition ones, literally the minute they go on sale, they're all over eBay in far greater quantities than were ever released as the actual shirts. And okay, the fakes are usually easy to spot because they do for like 30 or 40 quid, so it's obvious which are the fakes. And to be fair, most of the people who make the fakes are claiming them to be anything but there are still people out there who will price it up as if it's a genuine shirt and it's a fake. And that is one thing that has exploded in the last 10 years. But again, that's because of, as Jay mentioned earlier, the success of classic football shirts and just this sort of general interest in the football shirt market. I mean, prices is another thing, of course. Prices are ridiculous now on the second-hand market. Although I have noticed they've plateaued a bit in the last year. Sorry, go on.
Another thing with that is the match day shirt and the match prepared shirt. And, when I went to classic football shirts, I was amazed to see a whole wall with a guy, and his sole job was he had a whole wall full of cubby holes, pigeonholes, with typefaces, fonts, badges, patches.
Yeah, numbers, all
of this stuff that they bought in bulk from companies when they went bust. And again, it's just, I'm not saying it's smoke and mirrors, but it's like it's so hard to find a retro shirt now that hasn't got Keen on the back or Shearer or something like that. And it's all this fine line between, well, what's a genuine match worn shirt and match prepared shirt, which is this sort of catch-all word for basically I'm going to try and charge you a few more quid for it.
Indeed. One thing I would certainly add in terms of if you go back to the podcast we did 10 years ago, the thing we were moaning about back then was one colour kits, which were becoming the thing, Spain wearing all red and France in all blue and all that. So I think that was all we had to worry about back then, apparently. And now all this. As we sort of head towards the end of the recording, I don't want to sort of be all pretentious about anything, but do you sort of feel a bit like we've lived through the quotes golden era of football kit design, in that, kind of touching on what you all were saying a moment ago, that the younger kits that are coming in now are seeing, in many cases, new kits being launched for teams where the designs have just been ripped off, not just from their own history, but from another manufacturer's kit history. There's all the pre-match shirts and all the other bits and pieces. Do you ever sort of stop and sort of think, because I do occasionally, that we were really doing podcasts and doing blogs and stuff like that, and just about in the nick of time to be able to say, team had a home kit, an away kit, and a third kit, and then next year changed it, whereas maybe 10 years hence the whole landscape will be further fragmented and just so much more varied in content. I wonder if the 18-year-olds of now in 10 years time are doing a podcast, what will they be talking about? There would just be, I don't think football kits in the same way.
I think in terms of the golden era of football kits and looking at it like that, I think there's two ways you can look at it. And you go, one is to say yes, I think we've been through the golden era of kits, but then for me, it's difficult to say, because for me the golden era of kits was the 80s. Now, is that because I was growing up in the 80s, so everything was brand new and exciting for me? Possibly. Or is it because to me the 80s was a great time of new technologies and designs, but before it went a bit over the top? But that's me. The other thing to bear in mind is the fact that for people coming up now, like you say, the 18-year-olds now, and the 13-year-olds who, when you first get into kit design and things like that, for them, this era of kits is their kind of 80s, if you like. So, okay, they might have had things done before, but whether they're aware of it or not is kind of irrelevant, because to them, it's new. Whatever comes out, it's new. And the world that they're kind of born into is one where teams release 5 kits a season, and their match prepared kits are considered part of the kit. But you still get new kits every season. So it's difficult to say, because your golden era is very much dependent on when you first get into kits. I mean, like, I know a lot of people who think that the early 2000s, and especially like the 2002 World Cup, was like the absolute peak of football kit design. Whereas for me, it's the absolute nadir. It was awful. People had truly run out of ideas, and the things that were like I said before, the experiments that were being tried, for me, on the whole, didn't work. But for other people, that's their golden era. So it's hard to sort of say, because everybody has their own golden era, and that's my devil's advocate take on that one.
I think you're right. I think it is about. I mean, even as this podcast has gone on, it's making me question my stance on stuff and thinking, do we just need to be more accepting, because of that very fact that actually this is what it's like now. It's different to maybe when we first got into it, but actually that's kind of okay. It's different. And Rich, Chris, you said something really brilliant once about how children get dazzled by pretty patterns and stuff. Do you remember that?
No. I can't say I do, but
we were having
lights and colour and stuff.
Lights and colours, and it's kind of dazzling. And maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe in the same way that kids who would have been sort of our age, growing up in the 70s, were dazzled by the replica shirts and the designs that came out from Admiral and Adidas and Umbro back then. Maybe this is how it goes, and actually it's just accepting that that's where kits are now at, and it is pre-match shirt, and it is training wear, and the one-offs and the anniversaries and everything else. What we'll be celebrating in a few years' time, I don't know, but maybe
socks. Yeah. It's all going to be about the socks.
That might be so. Are we suggesting that in kit design it's been the death of subtlety and nuance? Maybe that everything is shouted now in the designs.
Well,
I'm
not so sure about that.
I think it swings. Sorry, I was going to say this. I think it's a pendulum. Things come and go. At the moment we're in an era where sort of loud shirts and sort of shouting about shirts, and it is kind of the thing. But as we saw with the end of the 2000s and the Taylor by Umbro range, things went back to retro again. And the kit world is always going to do that. It will always be in flux, because it's changing, because you have to do something different every year. So over the course of 10 years, you'll probably go through about 2 or 3 cycles of, leaning towards retro, coming back towards newer stuff, and then going back towards retro again. So I don't think it's impossible to say that this is a particular era of loud shirts or anything. It's just that's where the pendulum is at the moment. And give it 5 years, and it'll probably be back to a lot of classic stuff. But at the same time, there is a lot of classic designs around at the moment. There's a real mix at the moment of loud shirts and kind of traditional shirts. So it's I don't know. It's kind of interesting times. I think because there's so much around, you've got a big playground in which to have your mix of modern and retro.
I think really that I guess the point I was trying to make, because I'm not so deluded as to think, these young kids of today don't deserve to have a golden era of their own. Of course, they're going to see the new stuff as being their own. I suppose to use a different metaphor, and it's probably the wrong one to apply, but you know how when we were all young, there was only like 3 or 4 TV channels, and there always seemed to be something good on, and now there's 400 different channels, and they're all showing crap. Yeah. I wonder whether the fact that there's more choice means that the quality gets spread thinner. But obviously we're talking about TV and football kits like oranges and onions sort of thing, but I'm sure there is a sort of seed of logic in there that applies, and it's just something interesting to think about, I guess.
And it is. I think you're right. It's culturally, it's of a similar thing, creativity and culture. And then maybe because of that, that's what, as Jay said, it starts when everyone has to start shouting, because everyone's trying to get heard above all that mass of stuff. I mean, in our day as well, bloody hell. In our day,
it was all fields around here.
Yeah, it was all fields. But people wouldn't buy necessarily shirts of another team. I mean, some people did, but now it's nothing to wear a shirt of a side that you've got no affinity to, other than you like the shirt. So straight away, that tribal significance of it is shifted or gone.
Also, I want to just add what I said earlier on. There always seemed to be something good on TV when there was only 3 channels. I know that even that's not correct. It's just that I think when you've had so little choice, you sort of felt obliged to watch even a rubbish program and to try and get some sort of personal enjoyment and satisfaction out of it. I guess that's what I was finishing.
I think it's a kind of logical thing, really. Humans by nature tend to sort of rank things, as in, this is my favorite, that's my least favorite. And when you've only got 3 things to choose from, there's always going to be one thing that's going to be a favorite out of those 3. If you've got 100 things, yes, you'll still have a favorite, but you'll probably have like 5 favorites. But 5 out of 100 is only 5%, whereas 1 out of 3 is 33%. So it's like, in terms of statistics, if you've got a limited choice, you're always going to remember the sort of the ones you like the most more strongly, because it stood out more, because there was less to go around. I mean, I've watched programs with Jim Davidson in it, so that just shows you will watch anything at times.
Was it Up the Elephant Around the Castle?
Oh, God, it was, yeah. And what was the other one he did? Wasn't there one where he was a chauffeur?
Home
Yeah, Jesus
Home James. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen, before we go?
There was one last thing I wanted to mention, and it came right at the very end of the last podcast 10 years ago, and that was base layers. Because at the time, Jay was obviously, fascinated with base layers, and I think he mentioned about basically the changes to come with base layers, and I don't think any of them have come to pass at all. I think base layers are still exactly in the same place they ever were. We still don't have different coloured sleeves on base layers for teams that wear halves or anything. So I don't really think base layers have changed at all, unfortunately.
Okay, so shall I answer this?
Yes, please enlighten me, because I'll be honest, I don't really pay much attention to the world of base layers, so I could be entirely wrong.
Okay, so just a couple of things regarding that podcast from 10 years ago. Rich actually said, we were talking about clarity at one point, and we talked about, I think it was to do with like the one color kits. We were saying, okay, so you need to be able to easily distinguish 2 teams. And Rich actually said that we should, the team should have their team name emblazoned in big letters across the front, which is interesting, seeing as Puma actually did that a couple of years ago. But regarding base layers, sorry, Rich, you also said that Cardiff City didn't look like they were going to change back to blue shirts. They were going to keep red shirts forever.
Yeah, that prediction lasted well, didn't it?
So sorry, regarding base layers, so there are a few. There have been a few that have had the pattern of the outer shirt. So in the Dutch league, they do have alternate sleeve base layers. So Feyenoord for a few years have had one red sleeve and one white sleeve on their base layers. So that is 2 manufacturers. They're Adidas last season, and now Castore, I think. We haven't talked about them much. There's something that have appeared since 2013, Castore. So there are instances of it, but I agree with you in general, Rich. It has not moved on as it should have done. We should be way ahead of where we are now in terms of, there shouldn't be any teams that are wearing mismatching base layers or that don't have the pattern on the base layers. I think they should also have the branding down the sleeves. If it's an Adidas shirt that it's being worn with, then the Adidas stripe should continue on the lower part of the base layers. But that you're not really seeing that, no. Yeah, so that's a shame.
But I don't know whether this will please you or horrify you, Jay, but every time I see a base layer, you pop into my head. Every single time.
I think it has that effect on all of us.
Yeah.
You only have to hear the word base layer and you think of Jay.
If you've learned nothing from the four of us over the last 10 years, listeners, it's the fact that base layers are an important thing. And Jay has insisted on us conveying that message over and above everything else. I seem to remember on the podcast we did 10 years ago, Jay, you were a bit besotted with sort of short to Aguero's legs and things like that. I don't know if that's changed at all on in all the time.
It's another prediction that was made. And so I shamed Rich. I'm going to shame you now, John. You said that that would definitely be happening very soon. The short shorts will be returning very soon. And that hasn't really happened. But well, I don't know why it should do, but I still stand by that opinion.
I think it's just modern decency.
That's a very good point. That's a really good point, John. In women's football, and this was the thing that Sepp Blatter was vilified about, the idea that he said that women should wear tighter and shorter shorts or something along those lines, and that's exactly what's happened.
To be fair, he didn't say that for fashion, though. He said that to try and attract more people to the game. That is literally what he said.
The women's game is never more popular, and the shorts have never been tighter. So I don't know.
I've noticed watching Maidstone this season that about, I think, 4 or 5 of their players play with one short leg rolled up.
Yeah.
And I can see, and this, I think, is it Grealish started that, if I recall?
Alexis Sanchez did it years ago, I think. But there've been a few players since him, I think, yeah.
Shorts have got a little shorter. I still think, 10 years on, I still think they'll go back to shorter ones.
You heard it here. Not actually first, but you heard it 10 years ago first. Still waiting. Well, I wonder, quite how much information and knowledge we and every other football kit enthusiast has actually sort of absorbed and incorporated into their own personal sort of memory banks, because more has happened in the last 10 years than you probably realize. And obviously we've done our bit from time to time by recording some of that in the form of podcasts and doing and writing articles and blog posts, that sort of thing. So it's been quite an interesting period of time which to sort of observe all this stuff going on, and we will continue to do that, of course, in the next 10 years and beyond, I'm sure. I just wanted to say, however, as we sort of basically gently bring this recording to a close, that the fact that we all got together 10 years ago, as we did, to talk about football kits is something that's, I don't want to get all kind of mushy and all that sort of stuff, but it's personally enriched my life, because it's given me 3 great companions to talk about football kit with. And how lucky am I? Because it's like, when you're at school and you're in the playground, you're sort of looking for someone that you can kind of connect with. And, we don't always find that. But 10 years ago, it was you and I, Rich, and that was great. And now to have, 3 of you to talk football kits and to have recorded podcasts with and all that sort of thing has been absolutely fantastic. So I should personally thank you for that, Rich, for inviting Jay and John onto the podcast in the first place. And thank you, Jay and John, for accepting and being such great company, and a camaraderie in football kits has grown so well over those years.
Yeah.
Oh, that's and I'm really grateful. It's been a real pleasure doing these, and I'd like to get a bit mushy as well, because I in my last book I did write a little chapter, a little credit in the acknowledgement parts, and I'm going to read it out. And I just said, also, thank you to my close football kit friends who, through their encouragement, inspiration, wisdom, and support, have helped make this project much easier. Rich Johnson, Chris Oakley, and Jay Hanley. So thank you for that. I'm really grateful for your friendship and
Thank you. Well, I mean, we don't want to make this a sort of closed club, everyone. So those of you listening in, I mean, essentially, this is a sort of tribute to enduring friendship and to the interest that we all have in football kit design. It doesn't stop here, but 10 years is a big old stretch of time, and I, for one, have certainly personally enjoyed it. Thank you to the three of you for joining me on that journey. And you will be hearing from all of us at some point in the future. Of course, we're still around. We're still on social media and all that kind of stuff. So we hope you'll connect with us. But that's about all we've got time for. Thank you very much indeed, listeners, for joining us for this trip down memory lane. And Jay, John, Rich, thank you for your participation. And to all of you listening in, it's goodbye for now.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you. Sorry, I echo the thanks from earlier. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.